I want you to picture this. You walk into your in-laws' house on Thanksgiving, a house you've sat in every holiday for 4 years, and there is a man at the dinner table you have never been formally introduced to. He is in your chair. He is holding your wife's family's good carving knife. He is slicing into the turkey like he has done it 100 times before. And the entire table, her father, her mother, her sister, every single person who has ever shaken your hand and called you family, is watching him do it like this is completely normal. Your wife is sitting right next to him, and when she sees you standing in the doorway, the look on her face is not guilt. It's not even shock. It is the look of a woman who has been caught, yes, but who is also, somehow, annoyed that the timing is inconvenient. His name was Derek Calloway, and I was the only person in that room who seemed confused about why he was there. My name is Marcus. I'm 36 years old. I work in commercial real estate. I close deals. I show up early. I return calls. I'm not the flashiest guy you've ever met, but I am the kind of man who does what he says he's going to do. Which, as it turns out, was the one quality my wife's family never forgave me for not having on paper. Claire and I met 6 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party in the city. She was sharp, careful with her words, and more beautiful than anyone who'd ever talked to me like I was worth listening to. We dated for 2 years, got married, bought a condo, started talking about kids. I thought we were building something. Her family, the Hargroves, are the kind of people who live behind a very polished front door. Thomas Hargrove built a medical device company that at last count was worth north of $45 million. Susan Hargrove chairs 3 nonprofit boards and has never once in my presence laughed at a joke I made. Their older daughter, Megan, is engaged to a cardiovascular surgeon named Jake, which the family mentions so often it's practically his first name, Jake the cardiovascular surgeon. I sell commercial real estate. I once heard Thomas describe my job to a dinner guest as property brokerage, the way you'd describe someone's hobby if you wanted to diminish it without technically lying. From the beginning, I was tolerated, never embraced. Thomas shook my hand at our wedding with the energy of a man signing a document he'd been advised not to sign. Susan, at that same wedding, introduced me to her friends as Claire's husband, not by name, just by function, like I was an appliance she'd agreed to keep in the house. And hovering over all of it, always, barely ever named but somehow always present, was Derek. Derek Calloway, Claire's ex-fiancé, the man she'd been engaged to for 2 full years before she met me, the man her father golfed with, the man her mother still occasionally mentioned, casually, like it was nothing, at dinners I was sitting at, the ghost who never fully left the house. I told myself it didn't matter. Old relationship, old history. Claire chose me. I told myself that right up until Thanksgiving. 3 weeks before the holiday, Claire changed. Not dramatically, not in a way I could point at immediately. It was subtle, the way carbon monoxide is subtle. You don't smell it, you just slowly stop being okay. Her phone started going everywhere with her, face down on every surface, angled away when she typed. She'd step into the bedroom to take calls, which she'd never done once in 4 years of marriage. When I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd say, "My mom," or "Megan," and she'd say it in that flat voice that closed the subject before I could open it. She was physically present, but mentally somewhere else entirely. I'd ask about her day and get 3-word answers. I'd reach for her at night and she'd be already asleep or pretending to be. One night, I woke up at 2 in the morning and she wasn't in bed. I found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table in the dark, just sitting. I asked if she was okay. She said she was just thinking. About what? I asked. She said, "Nothing important." Then, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, she told me she thought it might be better if I sat this one out. Her exact words, "Dad's been under a lot of stress lately, and Mom has a lot on her plate, and it might just be easier if you gave them some space this year." 4 years of marriage. 4 Thanksgivings. And suddenly I needed to give them space. I pushed back. She got sharp. Sharper than she usually gets. Because Claire doesn't fight, she maneuvers. But this time, she looked me dead in the face and said, "Marcus, I am asking you not to make this harder than it needs to be." I still didn't know what this was, but she had clearly already decided. I agreed to stay home. Told myself it was fine. Told myself I was being the bigger person. I ordered a pizza and turned on football and spent Thanksgiving alone in my own apartment while my wife drove 40 minutes to Westchester. And then Jake texted me. Jake, Megan's fiance, the surgeon, sent me a photo at 4:47 p.m. No message, no caption, just an image, clearly fired off to the wrong contact. It was the Hargrove dining room, the long mahogany table, candles lit, the crystal glasses they only bring out for people they actually want to impress. The centerpiece Susan spends 2 weeks planning. The good china, not the everyday dishes, the ones that only come out when someone at that table really matters. And in my chair, the seat to Claire's right, the seat I have occupied every Thanksgiving for 4 years, sat a man I recognized. Not from having met him, from a photograph. A photograph I'd found years ago at the bottom of a box of Claire's old things, a box she'd never offered to show me and I'd never mentioned seeing. An engagement photo, him in a suit, her in a white dress, both of them laughing. Derek Calloway. He was sitting in my seat, in my chair, holding the carving knife. I sat on my couch in my apartment, alone, with my pizza going cold, staring at that photo on my phone for a long time. Then I grabbed my keys. The Hargrove house is a colonial in Westchester, with white columns and a circular driveway, and a front door that costs more than most people's cars. I've pulled up to that house on 100 occasions. I've always felt slightly diminished by it. That evening, I felt something else entirely. I rang the doorbell. I had a key. I rang the doorbell anyway, because I wanted to see their faces when they opened the door. I wanted to watch the moment before they could arrange themselves. Susan answered. In the half-second before her expression reset into composure, I saw something I had never seen on her face before. Not surprise, not welcome, but a very specific kind of tension. The tension of someone who had mentally rehearsed this scenario and was now executing the rehearsal. "Marcus," she said, "we weren't expecting you tonight." Not, "What are you doing here?" Not, "Is everything okay?" We weren't expecting you. Past tense preparation, like a reservation that hadn't been made. "I know," I said, and I walked past her. The dining room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when a situation suddenly requires managing. Thomas stood up slightly from his chair, an instinct, and then visibly decided against it and sat back down. Megan looked at her plate like her life depended on whatever was on it. Jake caught my eye for just a moment and then looked away, and I understood. That was a man who knew exactly what he'd done by texting the wrong person and was not sure what came next. Derek set down the carving knife, folded both hands on the table, and looked at me with the calm of a man who had been briefed. Not surprised, not embarrassed, just calibrated. He knew this could happen. He had prepared for this. Someone had prepared him. Claire stood up from her chair slowly, like the effort cost her something, and her face was white, and her voice came out very quiet. "Marcus, I asked you not to come." "You did," I said, "and I'm here anyway, so let's figure out what's happening." Nobody moved. The candles kept burning, the turkey sat there, and in 4 years of sitting at that table, I had never once felt as out of place as I felt in that moment. Standing in a room full of people who had apparently decided, without telling me, that I was no longer part of the picture. Claire brought me into the kitchen and pulled the door mostly shut, and I could hear the muffled sound of conversation resuming in the dining room, like a dinner party recovering from a minor interruption. She kept her voice low and controlled, that voice she uses when she's managing a situation and wants you to feel managed without noticing the management. Derek's father had died, she said. He'd been going through a really difficult time. He and her family had stayed close over the years. She'd always been upfront about that, she reminded me, and her mother had invited him because no one should be alone on Thanksgiving. It was a kindness. It was nothing. I was turning something small into something large because I was standing in a kitchen having decided to make it large. She said all of this without looking at me for more than 2 seconds at a stretch. I was looking around the kitchen while she talked, and that's when I found the first crack. On the refrigerator, the Hargroves keep a rotating arrangement of framed family photos, the kind of domestic display that communicates exactly who belongs in a household. I'd been in that kitchen hundreds of times. I knew the photos. And there was one I had never seen before. A summer barbecue. Thomas, with his arm around a man I now recognized. Susan, genuinely laughing in a way I had rarely seen directed at anyone. Megan and Jake. And Claire, standing close to Derek. Not touching, but close in the way people stand when physical proximity is chosen, not accidental. There was a date printed in the bottom corner of the photo, because it was one of those automatic print services. The date said August, this past August. We were married. We were fully, legally, publicly married, and I was not in that photo. I had not been invited to that barbecue, and Claire, standing in that kitchen, had never once mentioned to me that it happened. I went back into that dining room. I don't have a clean explanation for why. Maybe I needed to understand the full shape of the thing before I could react to it. Maybe some part of me still believed that if I sat down and watched long enough, there would be an innocent explanation that made all of this okay. There wasn't. Thomas refilled Derek's wine glass before his own. Did not look at mine. Susan came out of the kitchen with the dessert tray. A specific pie, pecan, which I knew because I'd heard Derek mention it once in a conversation with Megan, and set it directly in front of Derek's place setting with a warmth that can only be described as intentional. I remembered, she said to him. Of course I remembered. She had made his favorite dessert. She had made his favorite dessert and seated him in my chair and lit the good candles and used the good china. Megan reached over at one point and put her hand briefly on Derek's arm and said, "It's so good to have you back where you belong. Not back in their lives, back where you belong." A sentence that had a subject missing from it, and the subject was me. And then Thomas, and I want you to understand that Thomas Hargrove is not a man who says things by accident. He has been running a $40 million business for 20 years, and every word he speaks is deliberate. Thomas looked at Derek and said, "You know the guest room is always made up. Use it whenever you need it. This is still your family." This is still your family. Still. Which meant it always had been. Which meant the whole time I was driving to this house for holidays and birthdays and Sunday dinners and trying to earn a place at this table, Derek Calloway had never actually left it. I looked at Claire. She was looking at her plate. She had heard her father call her ex-fiancé family, still family, and she had not said a single word. Not corrected him, not even flinched. And that silence told me more than anything else that had happened that night. I excused myself, said I needed the bathroom, got up and walked down the hallway that leads past Thomas's study, and the door was open a few inches, and I heard voices. Thomas and Derek. I stopped. Thomas said, "She's not happy, Derek. She's been not happy for a long time. I think somewhere you already knew that." Derek said, "I don't want to make things more complicated for her." Thomas said, "You're not the complication. You were never the complication. The complication was a decision she made 4 years ago because she was scared of what her mother and I would think. And I'll tell you something I should have told her then. We would have understood. We would have waited." Some doors, if you don't close them properly, they stay open. You understand what I'm telling you? I stood in that hallway and did not breathe. Her father had not just tolerated Derek's reappearance. Her father had engineered it. He had decided, at some point, without telling his daughter's husband, without any apparent guilt, that his daughter had married the wrong man, and he had spent however long building a quiet path back to the right one. I walked back into that dining room, and Clara looked up at me, and I don't know what was on my face in that moment, but whatever it was, she read it. And instead of asking what was wrong, she looked back down at her plate. She already knew what her father was doing. She had known the whole time. We drove home mostly in silence. Claire tried once, "Marcus, please, just let me explain." And I said, "I'm going to need you to wait until I can hear it." So she waited. And when we got home, she told me. Not all of it, but enough. She had been messaging Derek since March. 8 months. It started, she said, when he reached out after his father's death. "Just condolences," she said, in a voice that treated just condolences and 8 months of messaging like they were equal in weight. She said it had never been physical. She said it was complicated. She said she'd been feeling disconnected, and he was someone who understood her history, and it wasn't what I was thinking. I asked her, when she said she was feeling disconnected, did she mean from me? She didn't answer that. So I asked a different question. I asked, when her family started treating Derek like he belonged there again, why hadn't she stopped it? She said, "It wasn't that simple." I said, "It is exactly that simple. You say, 'This is my husband, please respect that.' That's all it takes, one sentence." She started to cry. And here is the thing about Claire crying. She cries beautifully, silently, with real tears, and it has always made me want to fix whatever I did wrong. That night, for the first time, I watched her cry and I felt nothing shift in me. Because I was starting to understand that the crying was also a door she kept open because it worked. She had not told her family to stop. She had not told Derek she was fully committed to this marriage. She had not corrected anyone's assumptions or shut down anyone's hope, because she was running on everyone's hope simultaneously. Her family's hope that Derek would come back. Derek's hope that she might be available. My hope that she was the woman I believed I'd married. She needed all three of us hoping, because as long as we were hoping, she never had to choose. That's not a woman who was confused. That's a woman who understood exactly what she was doing and called it complicated so she wouldn't have to call it what it actually was. People ask me, was it really that bad if nothing physical happened? Here's what I tell them. She spent 8 months cultivating an emotional relationship with her ex-fiancé while sharing a bed with me. She allowed her father to socially reintroduce that man into her family life, at dinners, at barbecues, in the guest room, and said nothing. She let her family believe, apparently for long enough that they were comfortable acting on it, that our marriage was essentially a temporary arrangement. She sat next to me while we discussed having children, and she did not tell me she'd been messaging another man every day for 8 months. She let me drive to that house on Thanksgiving alone, refused my company, and then placed another man in my seat. And when I finally asked her directly, "Did you want him there?" she said, "I didn't tell him not to come." She didn't tell him not to come. She told me not to come. She made space for him by removing me, and she chose her words in that answer with absolute precision, because Claire always chooses her words with precision, which means she understood exactly what she was saying and exactly what it meant. The line that lives in my head, the one I can't shake, the one I'll probably be turning over for the rest of my life, is that sentence. Delivered quietly, in our kitchen, like a technical clarification. I didn't tell him not to come. If that's not a choice, I don't know what a choice looks like. 3 weeks later, I reached out to Derek. I want to be honest. Part of me hoped he was going to be the villain of this story. I wanted him to be knowingly predatory, deliberately cruel, unambiguously guilty. I wanted someone in this story to be simply, cleanly wrong. What he told me was more complicated than that. Claire had told Derek in August that our marriage was essentially over in every way that mattered. She told him we were staying together out of financial inertia, leases, shared accounts, neither of us wanting the confrontation. She told him she was emotionally done but didn't know how to exit cleanly. She said this to him in August, the same August she sat across from me at dinner and talked about neighborhoods where we might want to raise kids. She told me we had a future. She told Derek we had a formality. She told her family she was finally finding her way back to the right decision. 3 separate stories, 3 separate audiences. And in every single version, she was the thoughtful, blameless woman caught in impossible circumstances. In every single version, someone else was the reason the situation was complicated. Her family thought it was my fault for being the wrong choice. Derek thought it was circumstance, bad timing, a marriage that had already quietly failed. I thought it was her family's pressure and her difficulty with conflict. None of us were seeing the same woman. Because she wasn't showing any of us the same woman. Derek wasn't innocent. He walked into that house, sat in that chair, and carved that turkey knowing she was my wife. He made his choices. But he made them with counterfeit information, handed to him by someone who needed him to feel like the hero of a love story so he'd keep showing up. She manufactured the narrative for every room she walked into, and the only reason any of it unraveled is because Jake texted the wrong contact at 4:47 on a Thursday. I filed for divorce in December. Susan called me once. Once. In 4 years of being her son-in-law, did she call me on my personal phone. She said she hoped I would understand that none of this had ever been personal toward me. I told her that quietly removing a person from their own marriage, one dinner at a time, while seating his replacement in his chair, is about as personal as anything can get. Then I hung up and never picked up a call from that number again. I've heard through mutual contacts that Claire and Derek are together now. I don't know if it's real or if she's already building new rooms in that relationship she can retreat to when it gets hard. I genuinely don't know if she's capable of being someone's only story. I'm not sure she knows either. What I know is this. For 8 months, minimum 8 months, probably longer, I was a man who came home every night to a woman who had already quietly decided he was temporary. I talked about kids and vacations and what I wanted our life to look like, and she let me. She listened carefully. She nodded in the right places. She said things like, "I think so too," and "eventually, yes," and "let's figure it out soon." And the whole time, behind the face I loved and trusted completely, she was running 3 parallel versions of a life she hadn't yet chosen between. She didn't lose control of her life. She lost her nerve at choosing one. And I was the cost of that. Not just betrayed, not just lied to. Quietly, calmly, and very deliberately made temporary in my own marriage, by a woman who needed me to believe I was permanent, so I'd stay in place while she figured out what she actually wanted. The chair was already set before I walked through that door. It had been set for a long time. And the cruelest part, the part I keep coming back to, is that she knew I'd eventually figure it out. She just needed enough time. I wonder sometimes how much longer she would have needed.